Our story is about one of the most famous named auto highways in the United States, the Yellowstone Trail, a good road from Plymouth Rock to Puget Sound, 1912 to 1930. This auto road had a name because there were no numbers on highways in 1912. Our story is about the creation of this transcontinental auto route. Joe Parmley gets stuck in the mud. Our Yellowstone Trail story starts with Joe Parmley. One fine day in April 1912, Joe, almost everyone called him Mr. Parmley, of course, started off in his new Studebaker to drive the 26 miles from Aberdeen, South Dakota, to his home in Ipswich. He probably should have just caught one of the several trains. He got stuck in the mud of Helgerson Slough. He often thought long and hard about bad roads. When he was in the South Dakota legislature in 1907, he had argued for state aid for better roads and was hooted down. America just ignored the need for roads for the newfangled automobile. What, he wondered, could he do now in 1912? It was the 20th century. Why were there no good roads? Joe knew that history explained the lack of roads. America had been carved from the wilderness, and whether European or native, the only transportation was by water, foot, or horse. In time came some wagon or stage roads, which were widened dirt paths. In the 1800s, the federal government toyed with the idea of building roads to promote settlement of the West, like Ohio. But its one big effort, the National Pike from Cumberland to the Mississippi, was too ambitious, and besides, it smacked of socialism. It was turned over to local counties to maintain, and it soon lost its identity. Entrepreneurs built toll roads, which seldom were economically successful for long. With denser populations and more trade and travel, canals became feasible, and they popped up east of the Mississippi. New York's Erie Canal became the leading example of cheap transportation. It still is visible near the Yellowstone Trail. Technology struck again with the bicycle. Bicyclists did not do well with rutted, rocky, or sandy roads. Before 1900, they created the National Good Roads Movement, with many local chapters full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. Then came the big one, the railroads. They didn't need a waterway, and the rails lasted under heavy use with no potholes. People populated the West by trains. Transported goods supported a burgeoning economy. Look at all the train routes a decade and more before the Yellowstone Trail. The federal government paid much of the cost of railroads through land grants, money often directed to personal gain. But railroads were successful in motivating huge change in America. They even supported the Good Roads movement, encouraging better roads from farm to railhead. Except for farm-to-market and post roads, what need was there for cross-country roads for your horse? None. Frozen ruts in the winter and mud and dust the rest of the year? Just take a train. Then came an even bigger one, the automobile. The car for the price of a horse, wildly popular, and the Good Roads movement took on new life. Parmley's car had been shipped to his dealer by rail. The entire West was being flooded with autos, some with bodies still unassembled, all delivered by rail. The need for roads was obvious to nearly everyone. The east of the U.S. had some gravel and asphalt roads, and even 1 mile of concrete. But from Ohio west, roads were ordinarily dirt and, frequently, quagmire. America had no long-distance automobile highways, just regional wagon roads. Here is a map of Wyoming, but it was typical of all states. Those curly worms you see are RFD routes and routes to train stations. Connected roads, even across most counties, were still in the future. And there were no marked auto routes. This chap in the fancy driving coat may be looking at a railroad map, auto road maps were rare. So with no numbered roads and few road maps, how did the traveler get around? They had blue books, like this one. Someone had to ride shotgun and read to the driver instructions like these at Fond du Lac. 4th and Main Streets, courthouse on right. Go south with trolley on Main Street. Cross railroad tracks at Byron, 8.5 miles on. Then through Lomira. Oh, for a map! The roads were bad. Driving that car from town to town or across the country was not a joyride.
And one night we was coming home from town and the roads was frozen. We was trying to stay up on the high spots. The back wheel slid down in one track and the front wheel over in another. And of course the Model T didn't have power, you know, so we stopped. And my brother wanted to know what we do. I said, well, you get out on that side and I'll get on this side. We'll lift it over so it'll track. So we lifted the back end up, set it over.
The federal government and states weren't leading the way. Road building was left up to individual counties. However, a small federal grant was allotted for mail delivery on RFD routes. It was apparent that automobile road building was an idea whose time had come. A convergence of circumstances demanded it. And right there, in Helgerson's Slough, Joe Parmley joined the national cry to get out of the mud. On April 23, 1912, Joe Parmley gathered movers and shakers together, and he laid down an idea. They would form an organization to persuade counties to put local road tax dollars into one road, which connected to the next county road, and the next, and so on, beginning with that 26 miles in Aberdeen. Let's look at 3 of the visionary founders of the Yellowstone Trail Association. Joe Parmley was quite a leader. During his career, he was a newspaper owner, a county magistrate, a South Dakota legislator, and a land agent. There are 2 museums in his name in Ipswich, South Dakota. That's Hal Cooley, the manic general manager, goofy-looking guy, but a marketing genius. He kept newspapers apprised of everything, and he spoke to every Yellowstone Trail Association group across the country. Once, when he and a string of cars got stuck in the mud on the trail, he corralled all the drivers and led them in song to alleviate bad feelings about the trail. The song? It was, "There's a long, long trail a-winding." Michael Dowling froze off both of his lower legs, his left hand and 3 fingers of his right as a child when he was caught in a Minnesota blizzard. In spite of that, he rose to be a teacher, bank manager, international speaker, auto garage owner, and pathfinder for the trail, driving and routing the trail west and east. These were common men with uncommon abilities to envision something untried before, a whole, connected, cross-country route. In June 1912, they had a sociability run to Mobridge, South Dakota, 100 miles from Ipswich, to map a route. A sociability run was a caravan of folks in their new black beauties, all going somewhere together. This picture isn't very clear because it was taken in 1912 on that sociability run. In October, Lemon, South Dakota, invited them to map a route to their town, 100 miles west of Mobridge. So this is how they started. First, between Aberdeen and Ipswich, then to Mobridge, then to Lemon. In 6 months, they had routed 200 miles and found many supporters. 1912 to 1920, the formative years. And so it went. Grassroots energy, grassroots commitment. They worked with county and township boards to use the road tax to build a single connecting road to the next county and ultimately to find the best route across the country. The Yellowstone Trail Association didn't build roads with pick and shovel. They worked with counties, sometimes loaning them equipment. This is a split log drag grader, A horse pulled it, and it smoothed out the road. Ever hear of your downtown called the main drag? This is how the trail grew. It began in Ipswich, South Dakota, went to Lemon, 1912, then west and east, Yellowstone National Park to the Twin Cities in 1913. The route extended to western Montana in 1914. It extended east to Chicago and through the Bitterroot and Cascade Mountains to Seattle in 1915. Finally, it extended to Plymouth Rock, one route in 1916 and the final route in 1919. Local chambers of commerce, called commercial clubs then, committed their towns to support the association and paid dues required to get their town on association maps. The idea was exceedingly popular. For city fathers, visions of tourist dollars danced in their heads. At its height, the association boasted 8,000 members in 13 states. By around 1918, the country was crisscrossed by named long-distance auto routes, none related to state or federal government involvement. The first associations to sponsor routes were the National Old Trails Highway Association, the Yellowstone Trail Association, the Lincoln Highway Association a year later. Then there was the Dixie Highway, the Jefferson Highway, the Santa Fe Trail, and a myriad of others. Only the most important ones are shown on this AAA map. And here are some early route symbols. Imagine, short trips by auto were still drawing news stories. An 80-mile trip by auto made Minnesota headlines. Michael Dowling drove a pathfinding trip to Yellowstone National Park from Minnesota in 1913 and returned to a hero's welcome. Reporters vied for superlatives. The great democratizer, the auto, was available to all. Roads beckoned rich and poor alike. Camping was a necessity for some and a pleasant diversion for others. Sinclair Lewis's popular book Free Air of 1919 followed a rich family's cross-country driving tribulations on the Yellowstone Trail as they were repeatedly rescued by a poor young man camper. Equality existed in the wilds of the West. Finally, in 1921, the federal government began to seriously grant money to states for road construction, which led to the grand years. 1921 to 1925, the grand years. The Yellowstone Trail Association took up advertising for tourists. The association encouraged tourism, especially from the east. They assured people that there was gasoline available, that Indians no longer attacked travelers, and that campgrounds existed. To draw tourists, they created 17 tourist bureaus, like today's AAA, which gave out maps, weather reports, advice on local conditions, and directions to the next association bureau. Additionally, hotels and garages along the trail were supplied with literature to hand out. One year, the association handed out over 1 million pieces of literature, most with names of participating towns listed. They even used tents on streets. They held popular trail days to improve the trail. It was usually a high-impact day with everybody out, big picnic lunch, politicians, the press present, much publicity for the Yellowstone Trail and the association. Trailmen were locals who represented the association and who kept an eye on their portion of the trail. They reported repair needs and so forth to the association headquarters. They also were sometimes local campground superintendents who kept track of numbers and destinations of campers. Small-town newspapers proudly reported camping data on front pages. As numbers grew and services such as running water and covered kitchens were supplied by the town, free or sometimes only 50 cents to keep out the bums. What probably helped the traveler the most was the marking of the trail. Yellow, what else, signs with black arrows pointing toward Yellowstone National Park were plastered on anything near the road. Trees, rocks, side of buildings. And for publicity, the Yellowstone Trail Association held 2 spectacular relay races against time. One in 1915 from Chicago to Seattle in 97 hours, and the next in 1916 from Plymouth Rock to Puget Sound in 121 hours. That one averaged 31 miles per hour. These races proved the reliability of the route, and it was declared a military road when we entered World War I. 1926 to 1930, the Sunset Years. As early as 1918, Wisconsin had numbered its roads and produced road maps, the first in the nation to do so. But the Yellowstone Trail kept its colors up because it was so popular. In early 1927, roads became numbered across the U.S. Names were replaced by the government-sponsored numbering system we still use today. The Yellowstone Trail became a plethora of county numbers, 26 state routes, 14 U.S. numbered routes, and, eventually, 2 interstates. Then came the Depression, making fundraising impossible. They couldn't collect dues, and traffic fell. The Yellowstone Trail Association closed its doors in March 1930. This sign in Indiana says it all. Yellowstone Trail, bridge out, dead end, road closed, with a modern bridge above. Named highways were gone, largely forgotten, for about 70 years. But now history buffs and eccentrics interested in life in the past lane are researching some of them and promoting them as authentic historic experiences. Today, reliving the Yellowstone Trail. Is the trail irrevocably gone? Hardly. You can still see parts of it in all of the 13 states it traversed. The Yellowstone Trail is moving from forgotten to a living history experience. It allows the discovery of small, pleasant things while traveling the slow roads off the interstates. The current Yellowstone Trail Association maps are giving antique car clubs a new experience in the slow lane with an historic environment. Communities hold celebrations using their Yellowstone Trail as a theme. Groups are marking the route. Over 300 highway signs are up in 6 states, most using the official sign. Museums are setting up displays. And parks are getting renamed. Some communities simply promote their historic buildings, their museums, motels, their restaurants, using the theme of the Yellowstone Trail. Some neighborhoods work to preserve their Yellowstone Trail, like this brick road in Redmond, Washington. A street was named Yellowstone in Wisconsin, and Lance Sorensen of Hector, Minnesota, made this rock. 2 trails crossed in Valparaiso, Indiana. For most, the journey on the trail itself is the goal. To see and enjoy this authentic experience, people are walking the trail, bicycling the trail, and most are driving the trail, even these Japanese tourists. Consider things you never see along the interstate. Travel the slow route on the Yellowstone Trail off the interstates and discover sights that most never see. Here is a scattering of things that we have found, and so can you. Find the Natural Pier Bridge in Montana. Visit Yankee Jim Canyon on the way to Yellowstone National Park and see convict-built roadways. See the Roosevelt Entrance Arch from the perspective of a 1920s traveler. Imagine Hunter's Hot Springs Spa and Convention Center in Montana, where the Yellowstone Trail Association held its annual meeting. Find the Hysham, Montana Old Theater. Imagine attending Howard School in Montana. Some tourists got lost here. Find Marmarth, North Dakota's old popular auditorium. Find a rock near Marvin, South Dakota, with flakes of Yellowstone Trail paint. Learn about Jacob's Ladder in Massachusetts, and stay at the Wayside Inn in Massachusetts, famous as Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's hangout along the old Boston Post Road. Robert Kaplan wrote in The Atlantic magazine, "There are people who will opt for authentic experience. Only because of them, the art of travel lives on." Find your special experience as you practice the art of travel. Rediscover the Yellowstone Trail.